There are many very famous First Ladies in America's history. Dolly Madison, Mary Todd Lincoln, Eleanor Roosevelt, Nancy Reagan, and Michelle Obama, just to name a few. All of the women who are married to the president have left their marks on our country in one way or another, but not all are remembered for their contributions. One of these is Louisa Adams, wife of President John Quincy Adams. Louisa Thomas says we should know more about this remarkable woman, so she researched the First Lady's life, and the result is her new book, Louisa, The Extraordinary Life of Mrs. Adams. Thomas says that Louisa was different from any president's wife so far in that she was the only foreign-born First Lady in American history.
She was born in London in 1775, right before the outbreak of the Revolution. Her father was an American merchant from Maryland, living in London, and he was a very proud American patriot. In fact, she spent the Revolution in Nantes, France, so she actually has had a very international upbringing, even as a child.
John Quincy Adams was a diplomat when he met Louisa, and Thomas says that although he was smitten with her and spent a great deal of time at her parents' home in England, he was a rather reluctant suitor.
He knew, for one, that his parents were going to be quite upset with his choice of mate because she was not quite American, even though she had been raised to call herself an American and had been raised and told to marry an American. She had a very British upbringing, and she also was not someone that her own parents were very comfortable putting into a world in which it was full of self-sacrifice and the kind of austere virtues that the Adamses had cultivated.
When Louisa accompanied her husband to his postings in Prussia, Russia, and elsewhere, she won over royalty, the aristocracy, and other wealthy and influential people she met, despite her frail health at the time.
She just had an amazing personality. Part of it is that she had natural charm. She was very funny. When we think about these founding fathers and these early republic people, we sort of think of them as kind of either austere or cast in marble. But she was very, very funny. She was irreverent. She was pretty. She spoke French, which in the courts was crucial. And I think also people sensed a bit of vulnerability about her. Certainly in that first moment, meeting the Prussian king and queen, they could sense that she needed a little bit of kindness. And they responded with it, and she blossomed under that warmth and attention.
Louisa's personality helped John Quincy Adams in his work because it offset his colder, more business-like persona with one of gaiety and warmth. Yet there was a pall over the marriage. Louisa had several miscarriages, one that was nearly fatal. She gave birth to 3 sons and 1 daughter, who died just after her first birthday in St. Petersburg, Russia. To add to that sadness was the legacy of Louisa's family. Her father went bankrupt and fled with his family to avoid paying his debts right after Louisa's and John Quincy's wedding. He also failed to pay his daughter's dowry. Thomas says the shame of that stayed with Louisa throughout her entire marriage.
He didn't hold it over her, but she felt that in some ways this had stained her, and it really haunted her for the rest of her life, especially when at times of extreme vulnerability.
Although Louisa was often ill and had suffered the loss of a child in Russia, she was no shrinking violet. When the situation called for strength and resolve, Thomas says she could meet any challenge. And she did when she was forced to leave Russia and meet her husband in France in 1815.
John Quincy had left St. Petersburg to negotiate the treaty at the end of the War of 1812. And she was left in Russia for a year, actually, by herself with her son. And at the end of it, he sent her this letter, the end of 1814, and said, "Sell all our things and pack up and come meet me in Paris." You have to understand that this is now the dawn of 1815, the Napoleonic Wars. Europe is devastated. Much of Central Europe is just a wreckage. And it's winter in Russia. She sells their things, packs it up, ships it, buys a carriage, hires a couple of manservants to protect her and 1 female servant to help her, and they set out. And while they're on the road, Napoleon escapes Elba and starts heading toward Paris. And about halfway through, they get wind of this.
Armies were forming and heading toward Paris as Louisa and her son made their way across Europe. Thomas says that she dug deep to find the courage to make the trip, using all of her resources to fend off danger.
It's rumored that she's Napoleon's sister. It's rumored that there's a carriage with a woman on it headed toward Paris. No one would be that crazy. So there's a rumor that she encourages that she's Napoleon's sister, and it gives her some protection. She had this idea that she was very weak. And this is part of the expectation for a woman at the time. But the truth is that she was incredibly resilient. And when she was tested, she just thrived. She really, really withstood that and flourished with her menservants who had been hired to protect her fled. They were scared. They left her. She went on.
John Quincy's expertise in foreign affairs continued after the couple were reunited. He served as President Monroe's Secretary of State from 1817 to 1825. Thomas says that Louisa was aware of her husband's desire to become president and helped him attain that goal using the social and political skills that her husband didn't have. It's hard to believe in this day and age with candidates and their advertising vying for voters' time and attention. But back in 1825, Thomas says that John Quincy and his colleagues thought it was bad form to beg for office.
He never even liked to admit that he was campaigning for the presidency. She understood really the personal in politics. She understood that people voted for people, and she understood that relationships mattered. And she had a kind of social grace that he just simply lacked. I mean, the word that everybody used, including himself, to describe him was cold. So what she did actually was that she did something quite brilliant. She had a series of parties. She called them My Campaign, and they were very explicitly to kind of keep the bright light of attention on him so that he could float above it. She gave him cover in some ways.
John Quincy Adams went to the White House in 1825. During his time in office, Louisa was bored since her husband didn't think she should be involved in the workings of government in any way. She still held some social events, but Thomas says she spent most of her time in her room, no longer the focal point of Washington society. When John Quincy lost his bid for a second term in 1829, Louisa thought that politics was over for them and they would retire to their home in Massachusetts. In 1831, though, politics called John Quincy back to Washington.
He actually quite early was elected to become a representative from Massachusetts, and she was headed back to Washington, and at first she was extremely angry, actually. She felt she had not signed up for that. In the end, she came to understand that this was his life, and in a lot of ways it was her life too.
Thomas says that Louisa not only had the burden of being a politician's wife, she also had to bear the grief of their eldest son George's suicide and the death of their second son John just a few years apart. During his tenure in the House, John Quincy embraced the abolitionist movement. Louisa was also anti-slavery and began reading and corresponding with the Grimke sisters, famous abolitionists and women's rights advocates of the time.
Louisa read one of their pamphlets about women, basically women's rights, and she wrote Sarah Grimke a fan letter, essentially. And they struck up a correspondence. And this was also involved in Louisa's own personal development about how to think about slavery as well. But she really started to think about what kind of education she had received and what were her rights and what were her responsibilities. And she certainly would not have called herself a feminist. No one was a feminist back then, really. But she was kind of interested in a way that was ahead of her time.
John Quincy Adams died in 1848, and Louisa died 4 years later from a heart attack at the age of 77. She was survived by her youngest son, Charles. Upon her death, both houses of Congress adjourned in mourning, the first time a woman's death was honored by the federal government. Thomas says that although she wasn't as well known as many other first ladies, Louisa Adams left an important legacy to America.
Her life gives us a view of history that is really, really rare. At a time that most lives were very constrained, the range of her experiences is fascinating, and few people will give you such a revealing glimpse into the past. She played an important role at a formative time. But I think actually really what most excited me was her inner life. She really gives you access to her hopes and her fears and her devastations and triumphs in that rare and thrilling way. She really made history seem human.
You can read Louisa Thomas's biography, Louisa, The Extraordinary Life of Mrs. Adams, available in stores and online. She also invites listeners to visit her website at louisathomas.com. You can also find out more on our website at viewpointsonline.net. You can find archives of past programs there and on iTunes and Stitcher. Our show is written and produced by Pat Reuter. Our production directors are Sean Waldron and Reed Pence. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
May is American Stroke Month, and while not all strokes can be prevented, up to 80%, including recurrent strokes, may be, with a few changes, like not smoking, eating healthfully, being physically active, and maintaining a healthy weight. People who've survived one stroke are at a higher risk of having another, according to Dr. Mitchell Elkind of Columbia University.
About 1 in every 4 stroke survivors will have another one. The best way to reduce your stroke risk is to live a healthy lifestyle and work with your doctor on a prevention plan. Also, ask your doctor if a daily aspirin or other medications for secondary stroke prevention are right for you.
More than 116 million people in the U.S. have high blood pressure, and fewer than half have it under control, putting them at increased stroke risk. Nothing causes more strokes than uncontrolled high blood pressure. Learn more at strokeassociation.org/stroke month.
Since World War I, more than 645,000 service members have given their lives in defense of our freedom. On Memorial Day, we pause to honor these men and women who made the ultimate sacrifice. Join USAA this Memorial Day weekend in paying tribute to these heroes by dedicating a poppy, the enduring symbol of remembrance for the fallen, at poppyinmemory.com. You can also join in the social conversation and show how you're remembering those who gave more than anyone could ask using the hashtag #HonorThroughAction.
Trying to sell your old car? Instead, donate your vehicle to Heritage for the Blind. Pickup is free and your donation is tax deductible. Just call 1-800-835-1478. Heritage for the Blind accepts cars, vans, trucks, and boats, whether they run or not. Donate your vehicle and you'll receive a free 3-day vacation voucher to over 50 locations. Call 1-800-835-1478. That's 1-800-835-1478.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of Media Tracks Communications. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook to learn about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on iTunes. Plus, you'll always find podcasts of our segments and information about our guests at viewpointsonline.net. Join us again next week for your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.